You are my protective angel. Thank you very much. We missed you for the past few days, but I didn't miss to to click on that magical button. So okay, I started. All right. So I start now the slideshow. You see the screen, right? Philip Johnson, 1906, 2005. So he he almost arrived at 100. Not bad, even in this respect. Maybe minus in his very otherwise accomplished life is the fact that he didn't have a family. He didn't have children. So maybe he tried to compensate that lack with in his artistic life. Let's call it so. He even had a, in a way, it's hard not to like him because he's kind of charming and you can tell he was capable of smiling. His eyeglasses, of course, belong to an architect. Here he's less. Here I just discovered this picture. It was published on Domus. They prepare the material, an ample kind of retrospective material about him. And in this picture, you can tell that he also had a so-called psychological shadow, that he was not a simplistic man. He was not a simpleton. He was. I think he was capable of doubting himself as well. And I see him with an old-fashioned telephone. And just as a small digression, I have to tell you that in 1982, when I was working in the office of Paolo Portoghesi in Rome, and I was sitting near actually not sitting, I had to stand up. I was working at a drafting board that was engineers use. Anyway, and I was near the phone, and one day the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and it was his secretary, was the secretary of Philip Johnson, calling Paolo Portoghesi because they needed to talk about the first Venice Biennial, which happened then in 1982. With him, I didn't talk, but I talked with his secretary. Anyway, even this picture, he's funny. What does he have on his head? Really, I don't think there are too many architects in the world, and I'm not talking here about stars. I'm not talking here about the first recipient of the Pritzker Prize. I'm talking about any architect. What kind of man would put that thing on his head? And he was. I actually think he's funny. I mean, really, I myself wouldn't easily put something like this on my head. And I think there is something self-derogatory about him that kind of balances other attributes that are associated with him. Anyway, he's not hearing me now, but maybe he is, who knows? We don't know what is in the world beyond. Of course, on the right is his very well-known glass house, and we'll arrive at it, a glass house that he built in the 1940s. So this was not built, a few, 30, 40 years after the war. It was built a few years after the war. And that's the house where he lived, but we'll arrive there. I'm just intrigued by this picture. He looks like a recent immigrant, if I would have seen him with 2 pieces of cheap luggage, I would not have been surprised, but he was immensely rich. Anyway, here he looks different, and in fact, I never saw him except in this picture with some kind of, a strange beard and mustache, or unless I do not see very well. Anyway. An interesting man in a way. This man who disturbed so many with his prolificity and long life and so on. Here he is with his terrible tower he built for AT&T. I didn't even include it in this presentation, as my inoffensive punishment for the fact that I think he could have done better if he didn't build it. But he did build it, and I know it. I have been there. I have been in that hallways. There are certain things I cannot accept, even though I have a democratic spirit. I have limits. Please forgive me. I didn't include this tower in the presentation. Anyway, so we go now to the, actually, this is very interesting. And I thought of launching the presentation with something that intrigued many people. That this man who was anti-Semitic and who sympathized explicitly, he even published that Hitler was more agreeable or more, more of a positive figure than Roosevelt. He had acknowledged sympathies for the Nazis, but strangely, and this shows again the incredible chameleonic abilities of this man. Years later, he built a nuclear research center in Israel. So the political leaders of Israel commissioned him to build a nuclear research center. I don't even know if there is another signature design of a nuclear research center, but this one is, and is done by the first Pritzker Prize laureate, as I said. This is the plan. Even the plan is, you can tell there is an architect here. It has a certain, in its concise aestheticism, in its symmetry, you can tell there was an architect here. And even seen from, this is a very nice picture, although, you could be tempted to read it perhaps in a pessimistic tone, but it is, artistically speaking, it is a nice picture. And yes, we do not build for the gods any longer, but we build nuclear reactors that look kind of like some sort of strange temples in a way. And maybe even the tree kind of wonders, what is this building? What is it? What is it doing here? Yeah, I think I never had a discussion with Mr. Johnson. I do not actually know a lot about him. I'm not an expert, but I think he was a man of a certain amount of culture. I think he was well read, and I think he appreciated very much the history of architecture, which I think he knew. So he was, from that point of view, at least, an interesting man and a serious practitioner and theoretician. And it shows actually in his architecture that he was never, even when he tried to be, resolutely modern, there is always some kind of clin d'oeil. I don't know how to translate this in English, but maybe you understand. Clin d'oeil towards the past, towards history. And look, even the columns. If I compare these columns with the ridiculous columns that Toyo Ito built recently, copying the mushroom columns that Frank Lloyd Wright built at the Johnson Wax building, here I see actually a creator. Yes, there is a still, they are diagrammatic in a way, but you can tell that this is a man who had a certain appreciation for what a column is. Although when I look now at the base, is kind of similar to what is happening at the Johnson Wax Center or building by Wright in Wisconsin. But it's a very discreet reference, and maybe he was not even referencing anything. But the columns are kind of interesting. And it shows that, he could have used just, undesigned columns, just to support, but no, they have a certain character, and and they are not divorced from the suggestions of history. And also when you think about the function of the building, you know, in a way he brought in some humanism to a function which is maybe anti-humanism. I mean, I'm not trying here to soften too much the meanings of his building, but I think he is to be appreciated for the fact that he brought architecture into a building which could have easily been just a prosaic, mechanism. Well, he made it also I mean, his building made it on a stamp. Anyway, of course, with such a beautiful tree in the courtyard, even a nuclear reactor would look a little more human. Now, we have the chance now to contemplate this very well-known work by him, his own house, where he actually lived all his life. And it's not just a house; it's a domain where he built a few buildings connected mostly with art. But we'll start with his house in New Canaan in Connecticut. I actually think the more I looked at this building, the more I liked it. As opposed to the buildings by Mies, where, you know, certain buildings by Mies, where I think the purity of their aesthetics could make one even a little bit hesitant to breathe normally. This is a building, I think, of a man, and I'm afraid I do not have the picture here with taken in his last years of his life, where you could see the mattresses he used for the bed. They were not at all designer mattresses. They were just two mattresses, one above the other, as almost any immigrant would use in the absence of a certain amount of money. And again, this was not a needy man. But I think he had this, I almost felt tempted to say nostalgia for poverty, which would be total nonsense. But somehow I think he had an ability to, if not sympathize, or empathize, but maybe understand that life was not just pink and was not just for the affluent and the rich and successful, but maybe it's just wishful thinking from my side. It's possible. And as opposed to the buildings by Mies, for example, here I found several pictures, if not many, with a building in the winter. Now, it seems that he was inspired to design this building besides Mies, although in 1940s, I think Mies didn't yet build the famous Farnsworth house that he built. It was built later. So Philip Johnson built his glass house earlier, and I read that he was influenced by the skeletons of the buildings destroyed during the Second World War in Poland. Now, of course, in Poland there were no such buildings, but maybe I actually think, I'm tempted to think, and I ask for forgiveness if I am wrong, I feel tempted to think that Philip Johnson was not unaware of the limits of life, that is, of death. And even what he said, that he hated vacations, and he added in an amusing way that why sit on the beach when you can build a building? But I think he was kind of attracted by why the Latins said through Horace, carpe diem, meaning grasp the moment. Because in another quotation by him, kind of equally amusing, he said, I am behind 4 skyscrapers. So I think he was in some kind of competition with himself to use his time properly, not to lose it, not to lose it in vacationing without, creative consequences. And, and I think he was aware of the limit or limits of life. And the reference to the skeletons of the bombed buildings in Poland is maybe just an oblique way to say, I know that a building one day will become a ruin. And this building is not a ruin, but it is reduced to this skeleton, which, from a certain point of view might obliquely refer to some kind of afterlife of the building. And also is not a very opulent building as he could have afforded, actually. Here is the gentleman, and I don't even know if he has shoes. I have seen him in his garden, if we can call it so, or on his domain, in some other pictures, also without shoes. So I think he liked the touch of the grass. I think he was an interesting man, and he probably had, certain problems regarding also sexual identity and even religious identity. So the only opaque part there is, besides the kitchen, part is the bathroom, which is that cylinder that you see. And of course, the experts try to discover some golden rule, proportions that will arrive at that plan also. I think it's a good building, and it's not, again, if I compare it with a certain part of the creation of Mies van der Rohe, with whom he actually collaborated for the Seagram building, because when Mies arrived in the States and built a Seagram building, he didn't have the right for signature. So that signature was provided by Philip Johnson, who again was the right man at the right time at the right place. Anyway, but here I see a certain, a touch of almost arte povera, although this is not a house that normally would be associated with arte povera. But I look at the entrance, it's not an emphatic entrance. It's not even refined, really. Well, this is the plan. And what can we say? It is a well-known plan. It is a well-known building, but I don't know if there are articles or theoretical approaches to this building from the point of view of not being excessively concerned, although what I say now could be debated. I actually don't think he exasperated an aesthetical quest. I think he knew when to stop. Yes, it's a coherent building in a modern, using the modern idiom, but I also think it doesn't become aesthetically opulent, or maybe I didn't express myself well, obsessive. And I think this is a quality. Although he could be considered a mannerist architect, but mostly because of his eclecticism. Yet, although he was eclectical, and he did find inspiration in history and also in the present, his present, he kind of remained himself. So there was a level of, I think, of genuineness, to an extent at least. Now, when I look at this diagonal, the path, I'm thinking of Villa Mairea, for example, by Alvar Aalto, and other famous buildings where the entrance was never straight to the entrance door. That was always some kind of postponement. And by the way of this, I just crossed my mind something amusing, that great Portuguese poet that Alvaro Siza admired so much. And I found out about Fernando Pessoa from Alvaro Siza. Uh, I don't know if you know this. Fernando Pessoa was in love with a girl in his office where he worked, and he at one moment he drew, he sketched the longest way to her home, not the shortest, but the longest. Because he was accompanying her home, so kind of like, because this is in a way also the longest, well, the straight longest path to the house is the diagonal, the hypotenuse of the triangle. Well, Fernando Pessoa, because he wanted so much to be together with that girl that he liked for as long as possible, he sketched the longest way to her house. I guess sometimes the taxi drivers do that. Anyway, so this is the house. Of course, it's not a house, but look at the painting there on an easel or whatever it is. It is not a modern painting. This is the painting of a connoisseur of history, of art history, clearly with modern longings or leanings, but with an eye also towards something else, and the painting shows that. Also, it's interesting that he combines fire with water, talking in almost alchemical terms, because this cylinder is hides behind it the bathroom, but it is also the chimney, the stove, and it's fire and water in that very cylindrical block, which is kind of interesting. He united fire with water, so to speak. No, there is something. I'm beginning to regret I didn't meet this gentleman. Maybe if I would have tried, I don't know. But I have a feeling he was actually more human, so to speak, than some people considered. And I remember, and I mentioned this, I think the other day, that when Louis Kahn's son, Nathaniel, I think his name, anyway, made that film about his father, my father architect, or my architect. He interviewed Philip Johnson, in fact, on the domain of this house. And I like very much the fact that Philip Johnson talked very highly about Louis Kahn, and he said that he was less than Louis Kahn. And I don't think he was hypocritical. I don't think he was just trying to please or to flatter Kahn's son. No, I think he actually said the truth. He said something like Kahn was the artist. And it is true. In comparison with Kahn, Philip Johnson was less and was more so-called impure, and maybe with an eye also on commercial opportunities. But the fact that he acknowledged this, I think, says something about a certain level of sincerity that he probably had. Again, and I apologize, maybe it's wishful thinking from me, but maybe not. Of course, he also brought other sculptures because he was able to. Also, something interesting. This was the house of a single man. This was not the house of a family man or a family. It was the house of a single man who lived here for many years, maybe 60 years or something like that. Yeah, because he was born in 1906 and he built this house about around 40 years later. And he lived to almost 100. Now, this is the plan, where someone analyzed it in terms of course, if you make a celebrated building, a so-called successful building, immediately some theoreticians come in and they begin to discover all kinds of correspondences and you know, secret, mysterious geometrical relationships. And of course, the golden section is unavoidable. They did this also with Alberti and with any famous building. So, although I don't know if Alberti consciously, his building in Mantua used the golden section rectangle, or if Philip Johnson did, but it's not necessary. You know, at one point, the experts come in and they discover things that you never thought of. But maybe he did, but I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So this is the house of the master. I imagine that this corner where you see this eye profile, still profile of the structure, I imagine Mies would have done it differently, because it's done almost, I don't know, maybe it's risky what I'm trying to say, but it shows in a way that he was not obsessive about aesthetics. And I think this could have been a danger, but I think it's also a quality. Now, this is a house that he built, 5-7 years later, kind of similar. Unfortunately, I have only one image, is this one. Anyway, we saw the one he built for himself. Now we see a pavilion that he built on the domain of his house. Of course, about 30 years later, postmodernism already affected his practice and his way of thinking and his way of building. But it's still very nice if you can see it, beyond the thin, trees in the foreground. I think it has a certain innocence. And, as opposed to other architects in the postmodern era, Philip Johnson was kind of able to avoid its traps, its trappings, because he used historical suggestions, but somehow he avoided to be too explicit or too literal about them. Although you will see a skyscraper in Pittsburgh, which is, but there he worked with John Burgee, and he did several buildings with John Burgee architects. And anyway, in this case, at least, this pavilion is discreet, and it could have been built at some other time. And it is a pure piece of work architecture. You could dislike it. Maybe you think, or you could say, well, what's so special? Maybe it is not, but it has a certain purity, I think, a certain innocence. And it's not easy. I imagine it is not easy to be in his position, in the position he was in, because of his affluence and his, acknowledged status and so on. So I actually think he did have some innocence, and I know that what I'm saying now could provoke others, because he was almost the effigy, the epitome of in a way, lack of innocence. But I don't know. It's hard to know a human being. We are all complex, and we can only assume certain things. Now, a sculpture gallery that he also built on his domain, well, obviously, he was an aristocrat. He loved art. He loved abstract art. Who could actually have a sculpture pavilion? But he was a lover of art. This is clear to me. I have many doubts, but not this one. He was a genuine lover of art, and it was shown all the way through the fact that he was always involved with the Museum of Modern Art, and he had a very important position there. He was always a promoter of what was coming and new. Otherwise, how to explain the fact that he co-curated with Mark Wigley the 7 magnificent rebels, that is the deconstructivists. He had an intuition, an incredible intuition. mean, this man was already at that time, I was in New York then, he was almost 80, 75 years old, and he foresaw the meaningfulness in a way, or the promise of the seven architects who at that time they were young. I'm talking about, well, some of them were younger. Zaha Hadid, Daniel Lipskind, Bernard Tschumi, Peter Eisenman, Kop Himmelblau, Frank Gehry, and there is always the seventh one that I miss, but I'm sure you will know him or her. Him, because there was only one lady, and that is Zaha Hadid. So let me try.
Excuse me.
Pardon?
Can I say something?
Please.
If you could show us again the previous photo, the one with that white, you said that this one.
Yes.
From what I remember from the first year of a faculty, the teacher told us that this was actually a working room that he built on his domain. And he had a small desk there right under that cone. That cone brings the light right above the desk. So from what I know, this is his office somehow.
Well, I don't know what the initial function was. Now it's considered, and is named, a pavilion. Maybe it had that function, but if it was, as you said, and I believe that it could have been so, and thank you for telling us this. Again, I think if it was his working room, so to speak, is a pleasant, in a way, some kind of a professional self-portrait. Now, I mean, this is the place where he works, and I continue to see a certain innocence in this building. It is a simple building, of course, but it could have been done in many other ways. Well, I mean, this picture, I do see a chair and the desk there, and it's right under the skylight. So maybe, yes, that's what it was. But it could also, it's kind of interesting because he built a chapel, and we are going to see it. I don't know what his religious or spiritual longings were or affiliations. I don't know. But I believe, even when I look at this picture, unclear as it is, if indeed that was his working space, I think he was an introverted man who appreciated a vertical dialogue with light, not to call it something else. And there might be here even some kind of religious overtones, perhaps. I don't want to venture too far away. But let's come back to the sculpture gallery, sorry. Yes, I said what I said it, and I will say it again. He loved art. It's obvious. Now, not all the buildings that I show are shown chronologically, and maybe this is a minus in my presentation. Forgive me, but maybe for an eclectic architect, this jumping over the years might be somehow almost appropriate. Now, this is a very large building built in the 80s when postmodernism was rampant, unfortunately, and I really think postmodernism had very negative effects on architecture. But it was some kind of malaise then. I remember I was there in New York, and I remember there was a lot of pessimism. Well, at least in the 90s. This was built 10 years later, in the 80s. But it was this attempt to kind of, how to say, I'm trying to improvise now a thought. That is, why this return to history then, when we were approaching the end of the century and the end of the millennium? And maybe it was a fear of stepping over the threshold between two millenniums without the assurance of the past, without the assurance of history. That's why architects in the 80s turned their heads towards the past and many times, unfortunately, without absorbing it, digesting it properly, found help in that past. Here, you know, Johnson was using suggestions from the past, but did it with some vigor, and so to an extent is almost acceptable, as opposed to the AT&T building, which is maybe more decorative in a sense. But the attempt is the same, to connect with a past with which otherwise the building would have nothing to do. And once we crossed the threshold between two millenniums, nobody did something like this or would have done something like this. It was only then, until the arrival of deconstruction, and then once we crossed the threshold between 2 centuries and 2 millenniums, there was a period of time when there was an interest in mid-century modernism, and there are all kinds of recycling strategies of modernism. Anyway, of course, there are here, I mean, certain things, the references to history could be bothering a little, or maybe more than a little. But in the context of the 80s, not just in the United States, but all over the world, maybe it is, if not totally acceptable, but understandable. Inside, again, the influence of the past is not strident, and this is a quality he had. I think that he digested historical motifs. And there is this monumentality. He was fond of monumentality. He even stated that monumentality comes natural to human beings, and there is a need for monumentality. And some commentators say that he was always kind of interested in creating public spaces that were emphatic, like we see here, you know, and sometimes he succeeded, sometimes less, but the attempt was often there, especially in such big buildings. But you know, you could be maybe a little bit, you know, I mean, maybe this is not the kind of aesthetics that attract you, but it is it is difficult to forget this silhouette, if nothing else. And here is the gentleman sitting on a director's armchair, strangely with his back towards his own building, but I guess he couldn't do otherwise, because if he was facing it, we would have seen his back. Anyway, again, a lonely man. Now, the Transco Tower in Houston, Texas, this was not a modest building, of course. And by the way of Houston, I don't know if you know, I read that Luis Barragan at one moment was asked to design something in Houston, the very city where Johnson built this tower. And Barragan declared he couldn't do it, although it was a very appealing commission. But he said, I couldn't do it. He declared after he declined, he said, I had nowhere to start from, or I had nothing to start from. In other words, at that time, I don't know exactly, maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Barragan didn't see in Houston the possibility to connect historically or culturally with that city. And this is a problem in a city like Houston. You know, now maybe certain things happened since then and now, but I understand in a way the reticence of Luis Barragan. He wanted to connect with something and he couldn't find that something. But Johnson did find it, although it's hard to to know what, because this building doesn't seem relate in any way with whatever it was. This is an old picture. But, you know, when you build such a building, it doesn't really matter if there is a context around it that might be, you know, worthy of connecting with. This is a building that says, I landed here from the sky directly. So in this case, Johnson was not at all a contextualist. But usually with such tall buildings, it's hard to be. It is a building that could irritate one because of its splendid isolation. And I was sarcastic, of course, when I used the word splendid. Anyway, but I like the fact that he sits on that chair this way, because it shows to me that this is, deep down, he was an unconventional man. I mean, who would sit something like in this way? A teenager, a rebel to be, or something like this. I think he had something of a child in him. I mean, believe me, I have no reasons to talk so warmly about him. Really, I didn't know him, but I have a feeling that there was a child in him, and you know, this photograph somehow encourages me to think that maybe I'm not totally wrong, because I don't think too many architects would have a picture taken of them at his age, sitting on. You could say it's not an important thing. Maybe it's not, and it is not, but there is something here that says something about him, that he liked to turn the chair around, and that's nice, I think. Anyway, he worked many times with John Burgee, architects. They shared an office. I think at one moment was even called Johnson and Burgee Architects. Now, in this building, he is a little more explicitly connecting with some kind of history, if we can call it so. The PBG place in Pittsburgh, you know, yes, there is a level of abstraction, but also there are literal references here that could make one a little bit uneasy. But again, we are talking about postmodernism, and really he didn't go so far as others. Maybe also he was helped by the fact that these were very large programs, very large buildings. So
ABG.
Pardon?
Bruce, Dan Zier, Jones, Norm, Sofra, Flatarada.
Okay, we move forward. So this is in Pittsburgh. I mean, there is a level of superficiality here, of course, you know, but you know, these were the times in a way, you know. We are talking about the 80s in the United States, trying to absorb and digest historical influences for programs that had nothing to do with those historical precedents. Now, the well-known Crystal Cathedral in Houston, Texas, which is now called the Christ Cathedral, and it received a change, and I will talk about it when I arrive there. Now, the religious figure that commissioned Johnson to do it wanted apparently to have a building totally open towards light and the sky, and apparently because he started to be a preacher. Initially, he started in open air. Well, this was not supposed to be an open air cathedral, but it had a lot of glass. So the Crystal Cathedral was designed as a religious theater of sorts, acting as both television studio and stage to a congregation of 3,000. It was commissioned by the renowned televangelist Robert Schuller and completed in 1980 near Los Angeles, California. Philip Johnson and John Burgee devised the glass enclosure in response to Schuller's request that the church be open to the sky and the surrounding world. And open it is, I mean, through glass. It is a large, very large building, and it is resolutely modern. Here, the postmodern longings are avoided. I imagine, being inside would not have left one totally indifferent. Outside is kind of predictably modern for corporate architecture, is not really impressive. Although the plan, you will see that could surprise one. Now, what happened, I read recently an article that this building was reborn as Christ Cathedral, and it received a change that is probably because the initial client died, and well, the new leader of the church wanted to have less light and to bring in some shadow, so they covered the glass in a certain innovative way. So now there is much more darkness in the cathedral. Maybe they also were tired of excessive transparency. I don't know. I'm not even mentioning the costs of warming up the space in the winter and cooling it in the summer. In fact, Johnson said, if you have an eye on the cost of the bills for heating, you should never build a glass house. Now, he afforded those bills, but it's clear that he was very explicit. You do not use excessive amounts of glass when you want to save energy. And this, unfortunately, is still not known enough. Still, the demagogy of glass is seducing so many architects and so many students of architecture that I wonder, we talk about sustainability, we talk about the climate change, we talk about many things, but we do not renounce the infatuation with glass. And I have a book written by 10 women, American architects. They were all women, and Andrea Kahn, who was the editor of this book, wrote an article about the demagogy of glass. And I think this subject should be considered seriously, because excessive transparency doesn't mean at all a beautiful union with the outer world. It's still a separation. And sometimes maybe Jean Nouvel was correct when he said total transparency is indecent. But beyond what Jean Nouvel said, I think the relationship between the inside and the outside, between the interior and the exterior, is of a qualitative nature. And you could establish an affectionate relationship between the inside and the outside, even with a small window. It depends how that window is done. And in this, I agree with Alvaro Siza that the window is extremely important. Alvaro Siza said that he quoted Frank Lloyd Wright saying that apparently Frank Lloyd Wright said, it would be easy to do architecture if we didn't have to place windows. And Siza said, the window is the most important part in architecture. I don't know, but it is important, yes, because through the window, the interior and the exterior generally communicates. But this is the easy way out. You make a whole wall, all glass, and you think you communicate with nature, with the sky, with God himself. I don't think it is so simple, no. And of course, the costs matter too, especially at a time when we are concerned with climate change and sustainability and so on. But it probably was, kind of impressive. What you see here in this picture is actually after the building was so-called reborn as the Cathedral of Christ, or Christ Cathedral, you can see that the windows are covered with some materials that create just an opening with two diagonals, kind of like a cross. So already in this picture, you see much less light and much less transparency than Johnson initially hoped for and achieved, actually, at the request of the client. The tower itself, the bell, where the bell tower is interesting. It is in the spirit of the Crystal Palace in a way, but it is Gothic. It is ghostly in a way. It is modern at the same time. I like the tower more than the building. But anyway. Now, the building on the right is not done by him. It almost looks like it was done by Richard Meyer, but I don't know. Anyway, now look at that cross on the building in the middle. And we'll arrive, please remember, we'll arrive at a building that he did later, where that cross is not vertical any longer, but it is diagonal. And it reminds me, I will say a few words about it when we arrive there, because it's very interesting, I think. Okay, so this is the Crystal Cathedral. At least I am happy that people in their cars were not able to enter the cathedral, because there are such, I would say, anomalies too, to watch the liturgy from the car inside the building. But it is an impressive building, and the scale is, and this is how it was. This is how it was designed by Johnson. Now, this is not a modest building. We cannot use this word to describe this building. And I read once a very important Russian poet, Americanized. He received the Nobel Prize for Poetry. In fact, he was the youngest to ever receive it. Joseph Brodsky. He said that actually you cannot have a triumphal church. And I thought about it, and I kind of agree. I mean, how could you be triumphal vis-a-vis God, or vis-a-vis the source of life, or the mystery of life? You cannot be triumphalist, although many religions do that. They think that they honor God by doing extravagant or triumphalist architectural, but not only architectural, sometimes gestures. And vis-a-vis the source of life, maybe we have to be a little more modest. But this building is not modest, even though it has maximum of light and maximum visual connection with the sky. There are some interesting. I mean, this picture is very interesting. So I think the building had its mystery, so to speak. And if you were a photographer looking for mysteries, you could have found reasons to take some interesting pictures. And now we look at the drawings. You cannot truly say it's a very complicated building. It's an urban building of large proportions. It was made just for 3,000 people, not for 1 million, as Frank Lloyd Wright once designed, had sketched, maybe a cathedral for 1 million people for New York City. And that strange, and again, not modest at all, cathedral, which was never built, but it became paradoxically almost a synagogue later on. So if you look at that synagogue, and is a very good building built by Wright, initially it was meant to be a cathedral. This is the plan. Kind of interesting. I wonder why he did this so, because you saw that there was a lot of space around it, so he could have done it in many ways. Now, of course, the functionalist would be a little bit disturbed about those very astute angles, but maybe it's not the time now to consult ourselves with the functionalist. After all, why do we have to use every single square inch? Yeah, the detail of that corner. Okay, the visitors pavilion in New Canaan in Connecticut, also on his domain. And you see, he changed from that cubicle white structure that maybe was his office. This is another so-called pavilion. I guess any strange architectural creature that Johnson built on his domain is called nowadays a pavilion. I don't know exactly what its function was, the pavilion, the visitors pavilion, but its silhouette and its color show clearly almost, I almost felt like saying some kind of left leanings or some kind of expressionism connected with Russian constructivism, maybe because of the color, I don't know. Or already there is some influence coming from the Magnificent Seven who exhibited their work in the deconstructivist work, although this is not deconstructivist. But it is sculptural, and it shows clearly that Mr. Johnson had an affinity and an interest in sculpture. And he experimented. Why on his domain? Because he was able to, anyway. The inside is probably would have pleased even Alvaro Siza, although they are very different architects. And again, you see, I don't know what is this a chapel? It's called a pavilion, but it has the atmosphere of a chapel almost. Now, he also built an interfaith peace chapel, and in this case, I'm actually jealous and envious of him, and I will tell you why. It was my idea when the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro took place. Actually, before that, I was watching the Olympics in London, and I got very emotional, but that's because I'm a sentimental man. I got very emotional when an American sportif embraced the Russian sportif. I think the Russian got the first prize and the American the second one. They fought with each other, but in the end, one received the gold and the other one the silver. But I liked very much, I really became emotional when I saw them after a very dedicated and intense fight. They embraced each other with a lot of warmth. And then I had the idea, I said, what if every 4 years, the city that hosts an Olympics to build the House of Peace? I hear some noises. So if you are so kind to turn off the microphones, because this it's hard for me to continue like this. So please be kind and turn off the microphones, because there is a not a very pleasant noise. Thank you very much. So imagine that every 4 years, the city that hosts an Olympics will build a House of Peace or a peace chapel. And in time, you'll have a constellation of houses of peace, approximately the same volume and, all over the world. London, Rio de Janeiro, Tokyo, and I think Paris will follow. Well, I was unable to launch it properly because I didn't have the support Although I try to contact Yoko Ono because I made references to the song by her former husband, late husband John Lennon, Imagine, and I didn't succeed in finding supporters for my idea. But I see that Mr. Johnson built already a peace chapel, an interfaith peace chapel, and this is very good. I think it's very good because he built a building, a small building, for the meeting between various religions. And I think this is needed in our world because we have too many conflicts. Anyway, he was already affected by, as a genuine eclectic architect, he was influenced by, you know, you can tell this building is not from the 80s. It's a more recent building, but he abstracted this idea to bring several religions together architecturally, and I think he was approximately successful, maybe even without approximately. It's the same architect, but he's an architect who took his role seriously for a different program than you know, the big office towers that we saw before. This is also something that must be said. Johnson was good at building very large scale buildings, but also smaller buildings. Some architects cannot do it. Some are very good at small buildings. Some are very good at big buildings, but to do both is maybe not so very common. And it's still the same architect. That is, you recognize so-called his signature. Now the Thanksgiving Chapel in Dallas, and this is the building I was referring to earlier. No, it's not this one, I'm sorry. He built several chapels, I even forgot about this one, which is you know, called Thanksgiving, but you almost see an Islamic motif here, you know. He had interests beyond his private room or garden or you know, faith even. And the spiral, of course, brings in some complicated matters in a way. Anyway, the building I don't think is so glorious. It's a little bit simplistic outside for my taste, but so are the buildings around it. So yes, this picture is nice, but that's because you don't see a lot. This one is also a little bit mysterious and it's nice. But when you see the whole of it, I don't think the proportions are incredible. The middle part is, to my taste, a little bit too high. But anyway, he did it. And inside is kind of interesting.
It looks like a ziggurat.
Yes, well.
Or the Babel Tower.
Well, yes, I would say more than a ziggurat. But yeah, obviously he was looking through some history books and he liked certain architectural types, and he had to build it because he was able to.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a ziggurat, but seeing this, I recall the first picture you showed us, the one with the nuclear reactor, that really reminded me of the actual state of the Great Ziggurat in Iraq, I think. Don't you think he could have some references to the Mesopotamian in his works?
Well, it's possible. You know, I mean, there are various possible readings between the history of architecture and his works. In this case, yeah, I guess yes. But what is interesting in a way is that the references are not necessarily from that very faith or denomination that he's trying to serve. And this is kind of interesting, you know. for example, what would the Tower of Babel have to do with Thanksgiving? You know. Anyway, and this shows that, you know, to put it simply, he was open-minded. In other words, he accommodated that amusing advice of Walter Gropius to have your mind like an open umbrella, because it functions best when the umbrella is open, meaning you have an open spirit. Now we see a building that is different than this chapel that we saw. It's an earlier work, but is monumental. And the design, the plans, if you look at them, you know, you have a square, you have a central hall. It is a good building and it is convincing. It's a citadel. It's a citadel. It's an art institute, but it is almost a fortress of culture, if you want to call it so. And this is the building. Inside and outside, I mean, both the interior and the exterior are congruent, although the exterior is very, almost misanthropic in a way. It doesn't have windows, it only has that entrance. But in a way, this is the function of a museum. It's a large, in a way, I know I'm a little bit brutal here, a storage space where you exhibit art and you don't need too much natural light, although you have from the top. But essentially, it is a storing box. And when you look at it, you say, yes, this is a museum. It must be a museum. Unless you say that it's a nuclear reactor. No, it cannot be a nuclear reactor. It's a museum. It's fine, you know, it's nothing very special. It's an orthodox modernism in a way, but it is well done. Now, this is an interesting house, and I will try to explain why I think it is interesting. I'm thinking of, and it's something I didn't say, and maybe you know, he was part of a group called the Harvard Five. And another very important architect was a member of that group was John Johansson, of whom we talked some days ago. Johansson also had a building where and it's kind of interesting, and actually I didn't investigate. Maybe it doesn't matter who did it first, because Johansson built a house for himself where he placed, and it was called the upside down house. He placed on the first floor the bedrooms and on the second floor the living room, just as Johnson did in this house. I would be interested to know who did it first, although of course it probably doesn't really matter. But this is kind of unique also to this house, that he placed the living room. Usually we place the bedrooms at the upper floor, but no, both Johansson and Philip Johnson, both members of the Harvard Five, because they all studied at Harvard, they placed the living room above the bedrooms. And not only that he placed it above the bedrooms, but also the architectural expression is very different, as you can see. This makes, in a way, this building interesting, you know. The base is solid, is rigid, has opaque elements, while the prism above is with large surfaces of glass. obviously the building was not made for someone who had problems to build, to pay for the energy bills. It is different than even the prism on the second floor is different from his own house, the glass house. I mean, this one has glass too, a lot, but it's divided into vertical panels, and it has a different feeling. And you can see here, you know, the long prism of the first floor has a lot of thick walls, and then the one perpendicular on it on the second floor is just glass. By the way, pardon?
Dan, I would like to add something about this one, because you know, if you enter the house from the upper level, right? So you would enter it anyway from the living room. And if you have this sloping terrain, so it just makes sense to build a plinth, what he did. And so the plinth is sort of goes along with the slope itself. And with this, you can place something on top. So it makes absolute sense to just go downstairs into the sleeping rooms, because you enter from up. So why would you, if you enter up, go down into the living room and kitchen and the public zone of the house, and then you go up again for the sleeping rooms?
I understand. So I understand what you say, but still it's unusual, from my knowledge, to see many houses where the bedrooms are under the living room.
We designed a house like that, and I even did not know this example. It was just a logical choice for a hillside house.
Well, again, I don't know too many houses that are like this. I mean, here, of course, you could enter, as you said, but in terms of expression, this house is almost rhetorically emphasizing that the living room is resolutely above the prism with the bedrooms, and he emphasized this. I mean, he could have used the same architectural language for both corps. They are distinctly treated differently, and he.
Yeah, but this. Yes. I mean, I see that, and I totally agree with that, because I mean, with a heavy volume coming out of the hill, he connects that to the earth, and he makes a plateau. He makes a artificial ground, which is because he does not have a flat terrain. So basically, what he does, he wants to place a glass box. But in order to do so, he first needs to make the terrain fitting for that. And that's the earthy and the ground connected volume to make this horizontal plane. And there on top, he places actually the glass house. So, but of course, he's not wasteful. So he fills the plateau he has to do with functions, and that's the sleeping rooms.
Okay. I mean, the sloping land is not so sloping. I mean, no, I continue to think that there is more to it than just this functionalist exploitation of the land, because you can tell the angle of the sloping land is not so big. It's he could have done it differently. I think I mean, I'm not against what you said. It's very possible that this was taken into consideration, but considering the angle of the sloping land, I think he had something else in mind as well. Anyway, because you see, you go up some steps in order then to go down. So there is some unfunctionalism here, I would say. Anyway.
I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, look, this is. I think this is something very interesting to debate, because let's say this is like 3 meters or 3.50 meters height of the lower floor, and of course, as you already pointed out correctly, the slope is not so steep to accommodate the full height of the lower volume. Thus, he either has the choice to dig it more in to make it flat, or you take the choice to stick it out a little bit and walk up with 6-7 steps. And that was the choice he did. So now it would be really interesting to understand why he made this choice versus digging it deeper in. So maybe it is because he didn't dig it deeper in because he wants to have the glass windows on the bedrooms going to the floor, and he didn't want to have a balustrade. That could be one reason that you just keep it a little bit higher up there. At the same time, you know, I would say, yes, maybe it's a conscious design choice to go up a couple of flight of steps, because that sort of celebrates the entering of the building. It even sort of makes this glass box on the entrance side even float more. So it has these floating aspects on both sides of perspectives, downhill and uphill.
To me, an issue that is still important, I think, in relation with this house is the antagonistic almost expression of these two floors. I mean, I didn't see too many houses where the second floor is done in a, I don't want to use the word style, but maybe I could use it in a style that is totally different from, I mean, it's the same house. It is one house, and you have two floors expressing two different kinds of architecture. Totally different.
I'm not 100% agreeing with these two styles, because if you say the house is part of the ground, then this lower part has no style. It is part of the terrain.
Forget the word style. I knew I would go into trouble.
No, I don't nail you down on the word style. Don't worry about it. But what I'm saying is, actually, it wants to be the terrain, and therefore it doesn't have very little architectural expression at all, because it wants to be blend more or less with it. Thus, there is actually only one architectural element.
Well, I wouldn't say
that is my interpretation. You know, of course, this can be wrong, and it's absolutely valid to debate that.
I wouldn't say the first floor is totally without architectural expression. And maybe we should move on because we dwell too much on this project. But here you have one house that has two different architectural expressions, and they are very different from each other, really. Anyway. I mean, you can even see in the plan, you know, it's as if there are two buildings here, not one. I understand what you say, that this is more like a, you know, a platform on which, and maybe the only architecture that was here was the, you know, the steel and glass one, maybe, I don't know. But it's so similar to the building built by John Johansson. Anyway. I don't have a picture, but I could find it here. Anyway, we should move because I'm beginning to be tired of this building, to be honest with you. The furniture inside is kind of strange in a way when you think about this sinuous, you know, sofa. Anyway, maybe this doesn't belong to him. I mean, maybe he didn't have anything to do with it. I don't know. Again, the lack of total interest, and I think this is not a good model for us, you know, this uncritical usage of glass and again glass, and it doesn't matter, it's east or west or south and north, the walls are still made of glass. I think this disregard for the cardinal points and the movement of the sun on the sky is a weakness in his case, and unfortunately it is a weakness in the case of many architects. We ignore the cardinal points and ignore the apparent movement of the sun on the sky, because the sun at east, as you know, is so different from the sun at west. I had a kitchen where I lived, you know, was oriented towards west, and I was melting down in the summer, you know. But, you know, architects, unfortunately, so very often neglect this. The cardinal points are important, and obviously Philip Johnson in all his glory ignored it, and so did the jury of the Pritzker, you know, because yes, we are we are sensitive to aesthetical matters, but sometimes we ignore very essential things like the movement, the apparent movement of the sun on the sky. Anyway, it's not maybe no, but in architecture, and especially today, I think it is important, very, very important to reconsider our relationship with the elements, with the sky, with the sun, even if it's an apparent movement. It's important, I think. But I like the fact that there is a bicycle there. Of course, that's not his decision, but a bicycle in a room, even if it is hit by the sun on all four sides, is a nice addition, I think. It's human. It's plus it's Homo mobilis, if I pronounce correctly in an approximate Latin, you know. Anyway, there are all kinds of strange things here. I don't know, those lamps or what are they? Anyway, they are a little bit strange. Anyway, of course, this is not a house without means. Now we arrive at a very different building, the Rothko Chapel. I don't know if you know about Mark Rothko. He was one of the most important abstract expressionists. He committed suicide, I think, at 65 or 66. A truly great American painter. Well, he was not born in the United States. He came from Russia, but he was, together with Jackson Pollock, one of the real stars of the abstract expressionism. And it is strange that he ended his life at the peak of his success. He did have success, and his paintings are wonderful. So the Daya Foundation asked Philip Johnson to build a chapel for Mark Rothko for his later paintings. And here it is, there in between the trees. And I think it is a serious building. It is, I mean, if you look at the paintings which are black, and they are black as black as black on blackness of Malevich, and they are also equally concerned with spirituality, maybe, I mean, maybe without maybe with spiritual connotations, no doubt. Some perhaps the expression of the building is adequate, that you feel that you are entering into some kind of sacred space in a way. Maybe you'll find even a tomb. Well, his paintings, Rothko's paintings, have a connection with the afterlife. You cannot see them very well in this picture. It's an octagon, so they're totally black. But when I say totally black, the Rothko painted with very deep shades. With, I don't know very well how to explain. They are black, but it's not a black without a lot of emotional investment, and it's a black that is very, very deep. This is the painter. Now, the painting that you see here is not in this chapel. He was truly a great painter, and I suggest to you, if you are not yet familiar with his work, to search him out, because he deserves it. He was truly a great painter, very different from Jackson Pollock, but equally good. Now I found this picture searching for images for the chapel. I don't know exactly what the relationship is, but I like the picture, so I included it. Anyway, this is the plan of the diagram of the placement of the paintings, which are triptychs on the vertical axis and the horizontal one, and then there are panels in between them placed at 45 degrees. It is a chapel, and you can see it's the paintings are quite large, and I didn't see the paintings myself except in books. I imagine the experience there would have been very moving. They also place some benches, and people could sit on the benches and look at the paintings. This is a building that was done to house specific paintings. So it was built for those paintings and not other paintings or any paintings. So it is a chapel. But you can see that he built several chapels, and you'll see another one. So there are several buildings built by Johnson that are concerned with spirit. I mean, even the sculpture, which is not his sculpture, but and the way it is placed in relationship with the building. Here also there is a meditation on the meaning of life, the limits of life. Johnson was not, whatever those who had questions about him might say, was not a man with some serious concerns about architecture and life and art and so on. I don't think he was a superficial man, although he did hide behind some amusing statements, and you can find his quotations on the web. Now, the Beck House in Dallas, in Texas, quite a large house, almost like a modern, you would say, the modern palace. You could be hesitant towards having affection for this building, and you will see some interesting things here that are almost difficult to expect in a house, in a domestic program. But this is a very large house, and it's almost has something so-called official. Maybe I didn't express myself correctly. You almost think there is an institution here. It's not a house, and maybe it is now. I don't know. It's called the house, the Beck House. He uses this arch, which seems very simple, but is actually sophisticated. And the more I looked at it, the more I began to like it and be seduced by it, because he brings in, very easily he could have fallen here into the traps or trappings of so-called classicist mimicry, but no, there is more to it, and I hope I have a detail of this column, which you can see it better on the right side. It is a little bit, it's very close to becoming decorative and superficial, becoming almost stage design. But also you see a certain connection with the columns in the nuclear research center that I showed first in Israel. But here it is upside down. So the column starts with 4 parts and then grows towards something a little bit different. I think he's interesting, and I think he had a nuanced sense of design sometimes. Although you could be a little bit bothered by this, slightly altered historicism. But inside, look at it, it's very unusual to have 2 stairs like this, one serving a corridor on the left, one on the right. Strange. I mean, if you look at this picture, you would say this is a theater or an opera building, or I don't know. You wouldn't call it a house. I think Johnson has a certain surrealism in his architecture sometimes. And I'm even thinking of the metaphysical paintings of Giorgio de Chirico. There is something close to what I might approximate with the word metaphysical or metaphysics. And he is close to stage design in a sense. Maybe I shouldn't say more, but I feel that there is a certain level of unreality in his work, which could be both a positive attribute and a more questionable one, perhaps. The inside also, you know, there is a certain level of atemporality here. And you feel also an insinuation of the decorative, although it is filtered. And but you can tell that he was not totally indifferent to what is called decorativeness or decoration, although you know the ornaments here are elusive. You can see it's quite a big building. But maybe it seems bigger than it actually is because of this rhythmicity and the arcades. And, well, it is big, of course, but I don't know. And also it is interesting, he uses the arcade, he uses these arches, and then inside you see modern art. So you are a little bit confused, you know, on one hand it's almost academic art or academic architecture, and then you see the modernist. And I think he was a man of inner conflicts. Well, this was certainly not a building for one person. I mean, here I was almost like a meeting room for several people. And the living room is, you know, just that, a living room. I mean, anyway, it is interesting in a way because you don't quite know for sure. Is it a house or it is a building for an institution?
Can you stay with this image for a second?
This one?
Yeah. You know what I find very interesting is the central piece where these three columns stop, you know, and you know it partly frames these trees, this tree plateau, almost if it is like a Greek ancient ruin where a couple of columns fell off. You know what I mean? Sort of you see it, it makes you think, how would this look if they continue, or you know, I find this is this is somehow the strongest element in the whole design. These sort of columns all of a sudden stop, because that makes you sort of, it is like as if the story is not told to the end, or there's a history to this building, which of course it doesn't have because it's not a historical building in the terms of ancient history. But you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, it's a good observation, Florian. Thank you. Yeah, why did he arrest the, you know, the growth of that arcade? You know, it stopped in there. Why? No, Johnson was not a simpleton. He was a sophisticated man, and I think a complicated man. And you know, good for him. He was able to build so much, because usually someone with such complications, and I should know something about that, is not so able to negotiate with society and with clients and so on. I mean, look at this. You know, it's metaphysical. It's yeah. You could take some pictures of this building that are could be very satisfying, even as you know, photographic art or surrealist painting, or you would expect Delvau's pictures to, you know, to see some silhouettes there. I don't know. Maybe I'm fantasizing a little bit. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a better resolution. I would have liked to have a better resolution, but you can still see it. I hope you have better eyes than I do. Yeah, you know, it looks simple in a way, the building, but it's not. And this motif, this arch that he uses, has a certain complexity. Ah, by the way, looking at those stairs, I think he was diagnosed or evaluated as having a bipolar personality. Well, of course, these days, anyone with some kind of, you know, dramatic shifts between, you know, melancholia and exaltation is described as being bipolar. But I did read that he was considered as having a bipolar personality, whatever that might be. Now, Puerta de Europa in Madrid, that Johnson and his partner John Burgee built, talking about bipolar, well, here they are. Two buildings, and not only that they are two buildings, but they are leaning towards each other dramatically, and they are not so small as they might appear in this picture. They're actually big buildings. Look at them. Actually, today I thought of launching a call for entry, so to speak, because I would like very much to have presentations by anyone. So if you want to collaborate, to present something, please do so. I was thinking of this possible theme, architecture as self portraiture, or the well, architecture and self portrait. Architecture as self-portrait. Well, maybe these two towers could, in the light of what I said before, of his bipolar disposition, if I can call it so, well, could maybe, but that is too easy, too easy reading, you know, that you have two towers leaning towards each other. Maybe, but I'm, you know, and it's not really important what I'm saying. After all, it is a gate, the gate, you know, in Madrid, and the gate in, he calls it the gate of Europe now, Puerta de Europa. Uh, but maybe it was also a gate towards his own integration of his disparate parts, of his two halves in a way. I'm trying, like an amateur psychoanalyst, to go maybe too far, forgive me. But the buildings are interesting, and I actually have seen them. I only once visited Madrid, and I didn't know these were made by Philip Johnson. Um, very well executed, and even I have a few pictures with details. Uh, they are well done. He took risks. This is obvious to me. He could have easily, you know, found he could have found a very comfortable trajectory for himself. But he took risks, and this shows me that he was questing. He was continually exploring other ways of doing architecture, and maybe even being in the world in a way. I don't think these two buildings are the worst built in Madrid. And you will see also some diagrams about the structure, some sections through the building. I think they have some power, and they are, you know. Okay, now we arrive at another chapel of Saint Basil in Houston. He built a lot in Houston. And this, again, he took risks. Well, also the clients took a risk, because who would depict the cross in this way? You know, this reminds me of a moment in a great movie by Ingmar Bergman, Fanny and Alexander, when some doubting of the film director, Bergman himself, was shown by the fact that at one moment the cross on the chest of a churchman there, who was actually very problematic in his morality and implicitly his faith, turns all of a sudden like this. It's not any longer vertical and horizontal, it's a little bit like here. And I think, I don't know what the people that commissioned him thought of that church, that cross, but it's very unusual, because it's almost sacrilegious. You know, I mean, look on the right, you have the crucifixion as we know it, but to depict the church in this way, this is it's almost a blasphemy. And he got along, he was able to do it. And I think it is, I mean, it moves me. In a certain way, is more effective than the other one. And also because it is a cross of light. But you would say it became a decorative element. Well, yes and no, it is still a cross, but it is a cross that is falling. It is a cross that is perhaps assaulted by some doubting, by some doubts, and by some questions. I think, he took some risks here. And also towards the outside. Now, you might not like necessarily this architectural expression, and you could see perhaps certain elements that might disturb the purist, and might even come closer to some kind of kitsch aesthetics a little bit, especially because of the golden dome. But you see, he works with various elements. Otherwise, it is a composition of a few elements. But I think I still think he is interesting. And yes, towards the outside, that cross is, I don't know, somehow it looked more acceptably at the inside. But still, I don't know if there is any other chapels or church where the cross is in this position. I actually do not know. I didn't see another one. Plus, there is the labyrinth. You can see the labyrinth on this portion of the garden with the grass. It's a labyrinth. I should know, but I'm not very sure if it is the labyrinth at Chartres or at Amiens Cathedral. I think it is the one. I mean, it is inspired by the one at the Chartres Cathedral. Now, the labyrinth itself is, especially nowadays, is almost a symbol of a form of faith that is not related to the Christian one. At Chartres, at least, it belongs to the prior form of spirituality, which was pagan. And the labyrinth was called, appropriately perhaps, a scandal for the intelligence. Yes, because, to place a labyrinth in the proximity of the church is almost like doubting the openness and the straightforwardness of the road towards God or towards the cross, because you get lost in the labyrinth. And I think this complicates matters, but I also think this is another expression that he was, I think, a complicated man, at least to an extent. And look at these illustrative fragments, the way they are scattered on the wall. They are used as ornaments. They are narrative. They are small narrations, small visual essays, so to speak. because we don't have any longer the narration that existed in cathedrals until modernity.
It's the story of the crucifixion and the ascension in the end. If you start from left to right, it's the story of being Christ being crucified and ascending from left to right.
Yeah, but it is presented in this. Yeah, you read it from the left to right, but it's still an unconventional, so to speak, narration, because it's, they are just thrown on the wall. The narration itself seems to me kind of connected with a sloping cross. It's literal, but anyway, it's modernity. Of course, we have the freedom to manifest ourselves as we want. But yes, your intervention is correct. Now that I look more carefully myself, although the ascension, you wonder, it's is that Christ really there? This was not him, was the artist. But I didn't see something like this in other chapels or churches. So it's still kind of an original way of narrating something, because many times these days we do not narrate anything through our buildings, not even in a church or in a chapel. Maybe he's too literal, or those who took the decision to illustrate in this way the narration in a way is too literal. But because it is literal, Florian discovered immediately what is the story here.
Exactly. I cannot speak Latin, so I have to read the pictures.
Well, nothing is written here anyway, so okay, so this is the cross. I'm still moved by this cross, and it moves me that the clients, so to speak, were so open-minded to allow something like this. This is, I think, a very, very nice picture, and you see also the cross doesn't have equal arms. This is another freedom that he allowed himself to have, and I think it refers to kind of the same thing, that is a certain questioning of the religious dogma in the name of freedom or otherwise. And this is the labyrinth. Now maybe we shouldn't read more than we already did, but I think it's still a little, it doesn't have the purity of a chapel by Tadao Ando, but he's a very, very different architect than Tadao Ando. And this is the last picture of this presentation. And now, if you have any comments, we can start a discussion. Thank you very much. Please activate your your microphones, and let's start the discussion if you want. Usually I have more than one presentation, but today I only had this one on Johnson, and I don't think I have another material that would connect with his architecture. But I think we could exchange a few thoughts about his work to try to explain why he was so so dominant in a way in the North American culture, why he was so influential, why he was a maverick, because that's how he was considered, as being a maverick. So he had there was an insularity about him. There was a, I don't even know if he had truly an office. He was kind of a lonely man working with John Burgee, he had his office, but I don't think he was an office man. I think he had this chance to build these buildings, but almost from a side in a way, this is interesting actually. A man of his accomplishments being kind of solitary in a way. Although he was also a very public man, but deep down, I think he was a solitary man.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
If you allow me, after you went through with the presentation and so on, that makes me think once again that in a way Philip Johnson did what the office big from Bjarke Ingels it's doing nowadays. They basically, although it's a little bit different because they have some kind of different basis of concepts, but they tend to adapt in a very opportunistic way, at least in my view, to all the projects that they can put their hands to it. And that I think that although I don't know if it is a good thing exactly or not, because some of the purity around architecture and so on can be lost, but it's a very opportunistic way to create opportunities to build and to do architecture that both Philip Johnson and in nowadays the Office Peak it's doing. So yeah, I just wanted to leave these thoughts here as a possible comparison between the 20th century and the 21st century. Completely different architects, but in a way they kind of came across with the same way of thinking by capturing any kind of clients that they can.
I think they are very different architects from another point of view. I don't see any relationship to history in the case of Ingels, but in the case of Johnson, I do. So this is, I think, a very important difference. Yes, in terms of opportunism, I think they can be compared and maybe.
Yeah, I was just sorry, Dan. I was just. In that part, I was not comparing their work. That is completely apart. It's just the way that they try to get clients and capturing funding to their works. Sorry, carry on.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know because at the time when Ingels became established, Johnson was just starting the architecture school. It's a very different. They had and have very different biographies. Johnson, yes, had opportunism, and he was not shy about it. He even compared the architect to highly paid horse. So he was open about it. But I also think. He also took risks. And I think actually Ingels takes risks too, because nobody asked Ingels to do twisted buildings. We have all the reasons to hate these people because they are immensely successful. And yes, they make us feel uncomfortable. But I also think we should acknowledge some qualities they have, because it's very easy to throw stones at them. But the truth of the matter is, it's not so easy to erect one building when you erect 20 buildings, and some of them, not the worst buildings in the world. Then, believe me, I have even more reasons than you to be critical. But I'm trying to be, if not objective, but I'm trying to. Well, in a way, yes, more objective. I do have to acknowledge certain qualities that do exist there. And in the case of both,
Dan, I was not criticizing the work. I actually admire some work from Big. I'm just saying that in a way, the way that they operate in architecture is similar. It was just that observation, and I can name some works of this last one, Big, that I already visit and so on, and I actually think that they are well thought and concept. It's just and this is not exactly a bitter critic. It's just the way that they think, which is not exactly a bad thing. I think it's very similar. It was just that in a way, I don't know for sure it was not, but in a way it looks like he got some kind of spirit influence or something like that from Philip Johnson. I was just making a comparison in a way that they get clients. Just that.
I don't know. I don't know enough.
Neither do I. I was just doing. I don't know. In my mind, assumption that probably it's not even close to the truth.
I mean, what I find interesting when you said earlier that Philip Johnson is an eclecticist architect, I wonder now if you're living that long and you're practicing that long like he did, right? Sort of what is 40, 50 years maybe? That it is not, isn't it normal or a natural development that you change your architecture even several times over the years? Or the way you do it?
No, I'm sorry, Florian. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright lived to 92, so just 7 years, and he didn't become an eclecticist. It depends on the temperamental,
No, what I want to say with the eclecticist is like, okay, if you of course mix everything constantly, did Johnson do that, or did Johnson start as sort of functionalist modernist, then whatever postmodernist, then he went through several phases. And if so, then he's not really an eclecticist, then he's just like developing as a personality. I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't like olives. So, and then I changed because when I'm adult, then I like olives, and maybe in 20 years I don't like olives. So isn't it a natural thing for people to develop and go through several stages in their lives, as well as how they perceive architecture?
Florian, in the case of Johnson, is about the relationship with the past, with the culture of history. It's not about olives, liking them or not liking them. This is the difference also between him and Engels. He was immersed in the culture of the past. He knew the history of architecture, and you can see some influences. And he got influences also from his contemporaries. So he was, yes, there was that side that, you change in time almost naturally. You experiment with different things. But I also think is this melange of various influences, which are not only from the present, but also from the past. He was a literate, that's how he was described, a literate maverick. He read a lot, he knew a lot about history, he knew about the theory of architecture. So you can tell this in his buildings. Yes, he didn't took them literally, but you can tell that, and this is the big difference I see between him and Engels, that in Engels I don't see any kind of reference to history, but in case of Johnson I do, although he could be also a modernist through and through. Anyway, I'm not an expert in Johnson. I only prepare this material to start a discussion with you, and I'm very happy that there are various opinions. And I think if we dialogue, it's a good thing. But coming back to what David said, it is infuriating in a way, that we know how difficult it is to even find a job if you want to work for someone else, but to work for yourself and to have such commissions, and not just in your own country, but in other parts of the world. And, yes, it could be a little bit, you know, infuriating, if I can say so. And architects are known for not being very kind with other architects. It's known this, you know. We are malicious towards others, especially if those others are very successful. Well, I read, in fact, today I read that people in New York and in the world of architecture detested him. Now, this is a strong verb, to detest. You know, I mean, they detested him because he had power, and he was also hard to pin down, you know, because of his chameleonic nature and the fact that he had an office but didn't have an office. He was living all by himself in the woods of Connecticut. So everything about him was a little bit unsettling, you know.
Yeah, I mean, my question is like a little bit is coming back to his work and the changing nature of his work. And this is a question now, does the opportunism start with a project only to get any project, or does the opportunism start when you see something somebody else has developed, like in the case of the model of the Farnsworth house, where he then comes up with a glass house? You know, is this the sort of opportunism which maybe other architects didn't like him for, because maybe they came up with this idea first, or were talking, and then all of a sudden he did it, you know? So was that maybe a point why he rubbed them in the wrong place? I don't know. It's a question.
I think it makes sense, that point that you just said, Florian. Probably, I think that is one of the things that eat the nerves of many architects at his time, I guess. I remember one professor from my former university that knew Philip Johnson personally, and he said that he was the most successful architect that he ever met, and also the most hated one. So apparently everyone was able to acknowledge his success as an architect, his accomplishments. But I don't know, for some reason they kind of didn't like him. Maybe it was because of that. I don't know. For me, it's not exactly personally the work, his work. I like a few works from him that then also showed and so on. It's not exactly one of my favorite ones, but well, I guess it was his culture of doing architecture and the way of thinking and so on. It's a product of the time. He was just I don't know, like a perfect machine operating at his time and his story context, I guess. In a way, he decided to become architect, and he did the most, try to take the most of it, I think. But I don't know, maybe it's a very generic opinion about it.
I would like to say something. Tomorrow, if I remember correctly, is the birthday of Michael Graves. And although I try to be democratic, I found myself removing Michael Graves from the list with the architects I wanted to celebrate. Although Michael Graves did have some qualities, but I was disturbed by his so-called development. I had a feeling that here was a man of talent who didn't use his talent in his later years to connect with society in other terms than in the terms of serving big corporations, and in a very almost inflammatory way, in a rhetorical way. Even for Walt Disney, he built these giant infantilisms. So I don't know. I have a PowerPoint presentation on him. If you want, I'll invite you tomorrow to talk about Michael Graves, the same way we talk now about Philip Johnson. It's kind of interesting that you have also, Michael Graves was also a very successful architect. He also built a lot, and whose ethics of building are also, I think, questionable. I would say perhaps even more than those of Philip Johnson. But maybe behind those errors, if I can call them so, there was also, I mean, I know I become too lyrical now, and maybe I should abstain. I almost felt like saying a trembling soul. Now, Michael Graves died tragically, very ill. He was paralyzed. But yes, maybe it would be interesting. Maybe, please me understand me, Philip Johnson was never one of my preferred architects. But I thought even architects who are not necessarily, close to our hearts, maybe we could try to know their works and understand them a little, and maybe then be more in a position to express some thoughts, some feelings vis-a-vis them. So again, and I will end with this, if you want tomorrow, because there is no one else to pay homage to, it will be Michael Graves' birthday, and I have already the PowerPoint presentation. If you want, we can discuss his work tomorrow. And now coming back to Philip Johnson, I repeat something that I already said, that I liked the fact that he acknowledged that Kahn was a superior architect to him. I like this very much. I don't know, maybe some people who knew him and I didn't know him, maybe they thought of him that he was an arrogant man. I don't know. From the pictures, I don't have this feeling, but I could be wrong. Appearances sometimes are misleading, but that I know, and you can see it yourselves. You can watch that film done by Kahn's son, my architect, and see what Johnson said very clearly, that Kahn was a superior man to him in architecture. And I had the feeling he was sincere. And I think this says something about him as a human being and as an architect, because it's not so easy to say that someone else is better than you, especially someone in his position and his accomplishments. Yet he said it. So, yeah.
And if I may interject,
Please.
yes, I was just trying to play devil's advocate here about the term we're using about Johnson being an opportunist. But I think it's rather much more critical timing on his part, that he's able to kind of like grasp whatever the current trends were during his time. And I think a lot of architects, the way we practice is we seem to celebrate, this side of architecture that Kahn kind of represents, where we detach ourselves more from society and try and do not actually engage with the people who we are building for. And so that's something I think that maybe, I don't know if it's just me personally practicing as a commercial art on commercial projects more, that I see being, this seemingly stubbornness of architects, that we don't want to kind of like do a lot of things actually. And that's it.
Yeah, but this is exactly, or most likely, the criticism from the architecture world towards him, that he probably, or that they say he's doing anything anyway, without questioning, without having a own standpoint. And I mean, this is, I find, a very old discussion about, or the past century discussion about how much this architecture should be critical, should be in opposition, or should go with the market, or is it then abused, and so on and so forth, right? And yeah, some architects are
but
more
I think
critical.
Florian, that like if you go back to the initial setting that we were talking about success in architecture, right? And I think a large part of success can be determined not by the material accomplishments or even wealth, but rather in how much of an impact our architecture does really have on society, right? And that means having to engage more.
Yes and no. I mean, just because you are able to have a finger on the pulse of time and be able to read commercial clients more doesn't make you, and you build more doesn't make you more successful architect, right?
Mm-hmm. But I think there has to be a difference between positive change and just, towing the line. And I think that's the differentiation that we might be looking for in terms of like, what does our architecture do? What does it contribute, to the general movement? I think in terms of like, um, I mean, there could be like a lot. I mean, every building is basically like we're all living in our built environment. But I think where architecture succeeds is if it kind of like contributes a certain amount of positive change.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I'm just not right now. I'm not sure if we are. So we're having a conversation or we're arguing against each other.
Well, no, I'm just like trying to,
are we
trying
opposing
to
each other
stir,
or we are one opinion? I don't know.
trying to stir the pot.
Yeah, maybe if I can interject, maybe positive change is a very noble aspiration, but is it enough just to produce delight? I say that in the sort of context of you could do something that's super sustainable, but maybe people aren't really interested, or it doesn't excite people. It doesn't. And Dan, I think maybe this would resonate with you that that architecture should make us respond more emotionally.
But I want to ask, do you think Johnson had a critical dimension in his work?
Absolutely. But Dan, I missed, I had to go in and out of meetings, so I missed part of this. Did you talk at all about Johnson's anti-Semitism?
Yes, I did. That's how I began. That's how I began, because it was amazing that about being known, his anti-Semitism. He was then invited to build a nuclear research center in Israel.
But he was a Nazi sympathizer, isn't that
Yes.
right? Which is a very strange stance for someone who's with his sexual orientation, right? That
I would say so. Yes.
So I think if that's well established, it's not very hard to really dislike the man.
Yeah, but then you can also dislike Heidegger and Knut Hamsun, the great Norwegian writer. I mean, there are many incredible minds of the human culture who sympathized with.
Yeah, I'm not like Ezra Pound and the like. I'm not saying to ignore them, but dislike is an easy thing to do.
Yeah, there are incomprehensible things. It's true. Some tragedies.
I had a friend that encountered Philip Johnson in an elevator once, just to tell a story, and he said something to him. He said, "Oh, I'm an engineer and an architect, and I really admire your work, Mr. Johnson." And Phil, the way the story goes, Philip Johnson looked at him. He said, "I don't need any new friends." And I had a similar experience with Helmut Jahn. I was being introduced to him. It's like, Helmut, here's the guy that's doing a lot of your engineering and coming up with a lot of ideas for your structures. And Helmut looked at me and he goes, I don't need to know another person. And just dismissed me.
Seems like a nice fellow.
Well, he's not known. He's not known as a nice guy either.
On that note, like a discussion like this, should it be more like, is it nicer for this to be a wider discussion with much more participants? Right, and I think because it goes back to the idea of architecture criticism being, limited to architects, actually, pretty much, right?
Dan, if I may say, something about Johnson's architecture, please. I am finding it very interesting that his so-called bipolar character is kind of reflected in his buildings in a way that his buildings are either very small or quite large and masculine. Do you see that in his work? I mean, for me, it is very clear that there is no middle ground, and that is very interesting for me.
That there is no middle ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you put it very, very, very well, Azar. I didn't think of it, but it's something worth thinking about. Yes, that there is no middle ground, as you put it. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I mean, did he ever do kind of medium-sized developments, buildings? You know, he's more into high-rises, towers, and or small kind of singular buildings. There is no complexity in the middle. That is something that I find missing. And if he, I mean, he was bipolar, so in a way, was he not able to actually manage or handle middle ground so that to build, you know, something which is not in extreme, if you like.
You asked a very legitimate and interesting question, Azar. I'm thinking now about myself. I always like basements and attics, but not what is in the middle.
Well, I mean, I've always lived either in the basements or in the, you know, top of high rise. So, and the middle doesn't interest so much, but
I understand. No,
I've not been kind of diagnosed as a bipolar. But the thing is, what interests me about Johnson's work is that it is clear that between the extremes in his architecture, the balance is absent.
But what about balance at the level of one building? Let's say his glass house. Do you consider it a balanced building?
The glass house, it has some kind of balance, yes, because there is some solidity in the middle of it. And then the strength of the steel frame balances the fluidity of the steel and the amount of the glass and the amount of the glass that is used. And it has some kind of pleasing proportion. So yes, there is balance there, but he probably was able to kind of master it on one building at small level or on one building at a larger scale. But whether he was able to kind of do that with a series of buildings in large, small, and medium sizes with different complexities, that is my question. You know, yeah.
I do not know. I do not know of him doing works of that caliber, as you mentioned, and he didn't do, as far as I know, public housing. You know, or housing complexes. So there, it would have been an occasion to show some kind of negotiation between, the small and the large. But he didn't do such works, and it's sad in a way that. Anyway. maybe that was one of the reasons he said Khan was superior to him, because Khan, at least at the beginning of his professional life, as you know, he built, before he became famous, he built in Philadelphia several housing complexes, and he worked for the poor. So that activity Johnson didn't have. And he could have had, but he didn't. I guess it was his choice.
Yes, it could have been. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
I want to ask you before you leave, and I ask everybody else, should we do tomorrow Michael Graves? I don't know what you know about and think about Michael Graves, but tomorrow is his birthday, and I am ready. I have a PowerPoint presentation on him done. So I'm very critical of him, as I already said, because it breaks my heart to see someone of his talent using his talent for what I call the infantilization of culture. And again, postmodernism had a bad effect on him as well.
Well, yes, why not? Let's do that, and we can all criticize or admire him.
Yeah, and as you know, Michael Graves was part of the group called the New York Five, and
Yes.
Johnson was part of the group, the Harvard Five. So there we have two groups of 5 people.
Yeah.
Although the New York Fives were more famous because the names were, and maybe tomorrow I could, if I talk about Graves, I could also show you the works of John Haydock and even Peter Eisenman and Richard Meyer I do not have, nor Charles Quidme Siegel, but that would be okay. Maybe it would be interesting to compare Michael Graves with Peter Eisenman and with John Haydock, because they all started kind of in a similar way, but then they developed differently.
Yes, I certainly would be interested to see the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else has ideas, thoughts, feelings? Be open and without inhibitions, because this is not a formal forum at all. It is a discussion that is spontaneous and honest.
Yeah, Dan, I would suggest Gautam Siegel might be interesting as well.
Yeah,
no,
the
not
only
a whole...
problem is I don't know enough about them. By tomorrow I cannot prepare them.
No, just a a slide or two, or just a conversation about them. Just not
well, I only talked about the addition to the Guggenheim Museum in New York some days ago. But they have villas in East Hampton and so on. They also built, anyway.
And Dan, what years were you in New York?
Well, I was between 1982 and when I moved in Chicago. I was for about 20 years. 82, maybe not so much. I moved, but between 82 and kind of 2000s.
I was there 93 to 97.
I think when I saw you here on Zoom, I said, I think I know this man. I probably passed by you on the on the sidewalk at the midday when there were 5 million people on the street.
Yeah, but didn't you ever encounter Philip Johnson at the Museum of Modern Art? Because he had that apartment at the Four Seasons, right? And he would come down and come to the museum for openings, like architecture openings?
Well, I told you he crossed the street when I showed the works on Louis Kahn on the last day of the retrospective Louis Kahn, but he didn't look at my drawings nor at me, so I wouldn't use the word encounter. I saw him crossing the street, yes, with a big, I don't know how you call it, not a bag. I'm beginning to forget English. This is a chance for me to use my English, so I'm grateful to you that you are patient with me. Anyway, I don't think too many people thought of Philip Johnson today, but we did. So maybe he will. I always say this, that in the afterlife he will wait for us at the station and shake our hands and tell us. He will tell us, "Welcome to eternity." I don't know. But by the way of eternity, I do think, and I don't know if there are books or essays written about this, but I have a feeling that he was not indifferent towards the afterlife and towards death. I actually feel he was, and it is shown in the chapel for Mark Rothko. And even that last chapel that I showed, I think he didn't neglect this subject, so to speak.
What's your opinion on that subject in terms of architecture?
Well, I don't know if only in terms of architecture, but I think reflecting on the limits of life enhances life, and in a way, this is what I'm trying to do with these presentations, because I am paying homage to people who are not here with us any longer, and so it is in a way a meditation on the limits of life. But I do think that somehow we devalued death by excessively apparently being concerned with it, on the media. And I said it and I will repeat it, and you don't need me to repeat it, but you turn on the TV, you turn on the radio, you turn on the internet, it's death, death, and death again. But death is a scandal, and I think we devalued death in its deep meaning and sensitive meaning, and I think this is a great loss for life. And I think maybe the pandemic and other crises that we go through will force us to reconsider the relationship between life and death. And memory is so important. That's why I showed that little film by Akira Kurosawa, where some children in a little village in Japan, passing by a stone, they put flowers there almost automatically. They simply wouldn't pass by that stone without placing flowers on that stone. And the visitor to the village asked an old man there, why do they do that? And the old man said, because somebody died in that spot. So it became a tradition in our village for children and anyone coming to the village to put some flowers there, even if they didn't know why. And this we forgot. In a way, these presentations are about putting some flowers on the stone of architecture. And because I think it's very, very important to connect with those who preceded us, not only because we can learn from them, and of course we can learn even from those who are maybe, a little bit different than we are, but we can learn. And so I think it is extremely important to try to understand that we are on the spiral of time together, that we are not disassociated from them, and we are not disassociated from those who will come after us. So if we understand that we are on a continuum, call it a spiral or some other way, maybe we feel less alone and maybe even less afraid. So I think it's very, very important to connect. And by the way of Khan, and I said this before, and sometimes I repeat certain things, but maybe they are worth repeating. I read a short essay of Vincent Scully on his friend Louis Kahn, and the motto of his essay was taken from a British writer, Forster, and it was just two words: only connect, with an exclamation mark. And I think if we can achieve that, to so-called only connect, is actually a great thing if we could achieve. Even us here now in this evening, it is evening here, to connect, even for a few minutes. But it is very, very important to feel that you are less alone, that you are connected with others. And it moves me to know that here there are people from the different parts of the world, and we are able to exchange thoughts, exchange feelings, exchange opinions, have a dialogue. I think, I don't know what you think, but I think this is not so little.
Yeah, Dan, I would like to share with you how grateful we are for this opportunity. I was having a conversation with Mahadev Monday morning, and Mahadev's a trustee of Arab, so he's very senior at Arab, and I've known him forever. And he was talking about your session on Gropius. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend that one. And he said there was a picture of Gropius that looked very much like a picture of Arab that we have in all our brochures when we talk about total architecture. And he realized that a lot of the things that Arab, that we had assumed had started with Arab, he had learned from people like Gropius and the modern movement, and that it very much is a continuum. And it was very enlightening for both of us. And you were the source of that. So just wanted to thank you. And you were
Bruce,
your presentation was kind of the center of our conversation.
Bruce, I am grateful to you, and I am thankful to you. And I think if we could connect, it means a lot. And I only hope that we can continue, because who knows, if the pandemic ends, then we will all follow our own paths. And now with this misfortune with the pandemic, we are more inclined for having this kind of dialogue. But it's very possible if there was no pandemic, we would have never met.
Yeah, so it's very strong. Only connect and continuum.
Yes, yes. Those two. I mean, Vincent Scully chose them in a very inspired way. And I'm also thinking of the title of an essay by Kenneth Frampton on Carlos Scarpa, "The Adoration of the Joined," because it's about the same thing, joining. And this is has almost some religious connotations, the adoration of the joined. Yes, I think connecting and joining deserve our adoration. And we should strive for it and for them. And it's not so easy, actually. But I think the rewards are could be significant. And I don't know if you know the oldest definition. I don't usually like definitions, but I looked for the oldest definition of art, of the word art. And the oldest I found from Sanskrit or Proto-Indo-European language was this one. I read in English: art equals bridge equals God. So is the bridge there in the middle, is that connection. It is about connecting. Apparently, at the very beginning, art had this meaning, was a bridge, was about connecting. And at that time, art was inseparable from religion, from spirit, from spirituality, from worship. And both Bergman, whom I admire so much, and Auguste Rodin, the great modern French sculptor, they both said almost ad literam the same thing, that when art divorced itself from religion, they both died, actually. Art and religion were one at the very beginning, because art was a form of worship. And the definition of the word kind of proves it. art equals bridge equals God. So if art succeeds in communicating at least a desire for connecting, for a connection, it deserves its name. Let's do it again. Let's meet if you want tomorrow, and there will be many occasions for you know, for remembering important names in architecture. We talk about architects, but you know, we inevitably we have some limits connected with you know, our interests and our profession. But we can learn a lot already. I am learning a lot when I work on these presentations, and there were a few other people who presented, like Alexandra Krivets and David, who is still here now, and who will present again, and then Florian and Daliana, his wife. And I invite any one of you, if you want to present even a project or anything, if you want to read an essay or express some thoughts or afterthoughts even, let's do it.
Yeah, and Dan, I want to be careful not to volunteer too much, but you know, there's a whole I want to say cohort of structural engineers that we could celebrate as well.
Please, in this, I need help because I don't know enough. So please consider yourself the, you know, the host of such possible presentations.
Yeah, well, when I find some time, I'll look at the birthday. So typically, you want to celebrate the birthday, is that right?
Well,
that's the.
No, I also pay homage, like you know, on the day of when someone died, like. But I found a website which with only with birthdays. For the others, for the day when one died, I have to look for other sources, and they are not centralized. But both, because you know, they are the limits of life, the beginning and the end, and so both, yes.
And are they the same presentations?
What do you mean?
Celebrating someone's birthday and celebrating someone's death. Acknowledging someone's death.
Well, someone said that, you know, we shouldn't celebrate one's death, but we celebrate the work. So we pay homage to someone who died on a certain day or was born on a certain day. Yeah, I think they are both significant the dates. Yes.
But they're maybe different presentations, right?
Well, in what sense different? I mean, of course they are different. They are about a different person, but they are paying homage to a significant, you know, creator or contributor to culture.
I got it.
Yeah. But I also want to propose, because, you know, I don't want to be dogmatic. And I also want to receive suggestions. Like, for example, I thought of some themes that address cultural synthesis. Like, for example, I thought of architecture nostalgia, or architecture and introversion, or architecture and architecture as self-portrait. To talk about architects who somehow were able to evoke some kind of self-portraiture in their building, or you know, we can find many kinds of interesting subjects, and create maybe even a collaborative presentation. You know, like several people could contribute to a theme that is of a synthetical nature. You know, attempting towards synthesis, because we are very good at analysis, so to speak, but I think it's one of the fatalities of our culture that while we achieve great results in analysis, I don't think we are so good at synthesis, and certainly not in the field of holistic approach to culture and life in general. So I think here we can do very interesting, you know, actions, maybe even cross frontiers between different disciplines, architecture and music, architecture and dance, architecture and literature, architecture and theology or psychology. I actually think such subjects would enrich us a lot and stimulate us. So please, let's talk about this next time we meet. Maybe you have, I'm sure you would have interesting ideas and suggestions for possible, because the important thing is to be creative and to be alive. And these meetings are born from heartfelt, impulses. There, nobody asks us to, to do this. We do it because we feel like doing it, and we can do other things that are genuinely born from what we feel and think, without looking for anything lucrative or or because an institution asked us, or I don't know what. So yes, we can do very interesting things. I do believe that together we can do very interesting things. So we met accidentally almost, the ones that we are here, but sometimes beautiful things happen because of so-called accidents. I don't know if I have the email addresses of everybody here, but in case someone doesn't receive messages from me, if that someone wants to write the email address on the chat, I will include that person or that address on some list. I also will launch several international architectural competitions in a few days, and I can tell you which ones. One will be located or to be located in Babylon in Iraq, and that is an homage to a great Dutch artist, Constant, who made a big project called New Babylon, but it will be an occasion to reflect on architecture for a site that is so rich in history and meaning. Then it will be a house for Adolf Loos, because it will be an important commemorative year. A house for Piranesi, also a very important year for Piranesi, 300 years since his birth. And Piranesi, I think, is very, very important for us, continues to be, even for architects who are so very different from him, like Rem Koolhaas, but he still mentions Piranesi. And then Beethoven, the great composer. So I did this for almost 20 years. So I have a certain experience, and these subjects still stir me up. And in a way, they are connected with what we do now, because now we commemorate through discussions. And I also launch competitions. How would you do a house for Piranesi? Or how would you do a house for Beethoven? Or how would you do a house today for Adolf Loos? Anyway, about this a little later on, but I have the text written and I will launch them in a few days. Because I also think that we should not forget that we are architects. So we can contribute to the dialogue also through architectural projects. And, they might appear to be, so-called unnecessary because they are not to be built. But who knows? For almost 20 years, I received about 2,000 projects from all over the world, people who sent their works exactly for such themes. A house for Frédéric Chopin, or a house for Johann Sebastian Bach, or a house for, anyway, this is the generic theme. But for now, as I said, tomorrow I will be here at exactly the same hour, ready to talk about Michael Graves and his, I would say, deterioration in the field of architecture. That's because he didn't have a critical, self-critical side, and he could have been, because he was a capable architect and a capable man and a capable professor at Princeton. But somehow he became self-indulgent, and it's sad because he could have done better. I think. But I will present his work, although I have question marks about him. But anyway, it does break one's heart when you see someone with talent and with intelligence and with sensitivity be a little bit uncareful about his ethical choices. So should we say goodbye to each other? If no one else wants to say something, let's, I know it's difficult to leave. I was in your position too, and even in the position I am in, if you don't want, if you feel like, you know, you don't feel like saying anything, maybe we should say goodbye to each other. And if you want, we meet tomorrow or another day. But again, if some of you, because some names are unknown to me, if you are so kind, please attach the email address to the chat, and I will make sure that we can communicate in this way. And I thank you for participating.
I think for today I'm going to get going then.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for the presentation once again.
Thank you. What happened to Alexandra? I didn't see her for the past 2 days. I hope
so basically she got call up again for work. So she's been working now from home.
But that's good news. Please wish her to be well.
Yeah.
Okay. And
I will pass by.
Okay, and to wear the mask.
No, she's working here from home. It's just she needs to be in contest, like contest communication through Zoom, so she cannot connect through
yes,
it.
I understand. Okay, say hello to her. Thank you, David.
I will.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. So there are 2 people here I do not know by name, David and Rief. How do you pronounce your name? Riefki? By the way, I love the way you speak English. Beautiful. You have a much more beautiful English than I do. I'm talking with Azar Faluti, Alman. Anyway.
Hey. Dan?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for today's presentation.
Thank you.
It was great, and see you tomorrow, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be here at the same time.
Sure. And maybe I will try to make a presentation, but let's see. Hello?
Yes?
I will try to make a presentation, but maybe not for this week. And let's see if it's okay enough to be presented.
Sure, please. You are welcome.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, now with Melissa, I know, and I know Ciprian and Anna. So should we say goodbye to each other?
Dan, I wanted to speak with you regarding certain aspects. I can wait until we should talk about the Facebook and the Instagram and.
Okay, but you know, we can talk in private if you want, or I don't know.
Okay. Should we speak tomorrow, because I'm kind of tired now. I kind of dozed off for a couple of minutes, but
Okay, sure, we can talk anytime. Just send me an email and we'll open Zoom or Skype or whatever, and we'll talk.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. Sleep well. I know you have all the reasons to be tired.
Yeah,
you have other exams?
1 a.m.
Do you have other exams?
Yeah, I finished all the exams.
So the vacation started for you.
Yeah, kind of. I'm still working though.
Yeah, I know, but what about the other students? When does the session end?
Well, I know that some other